Goad was the last patron. When Rand reached for the leather flute case, yawning, Goad stood up and slung his cloak over his arm. The serving maids were cleaning up, muttering among themselves about the mess of spilled wine and broken crockery. Hake was locking the front door with a big key. Goad cornered Hake for a moment, and Hake called one of the women to show him to a room. The velvet-cloaked man gave Matt and Rand a knowing smile before he disappeared upstairs. Hake was looking at Rand and Matt. Jack and Strom stood at his shoulders. Rand hastily finished hanging his things from his shoulders, holding them all awkwardly behind him with his left hand so he could reach his sword. He made no move toward it, but he wanted to know it was ready. He suppressed a yawn. How tired he was something they should not know. Matt shouldered his bow and his few other belongings awkwardly, but he put his hand under his coat as he watched Hake and his toughs approach. Hake was carrying an oil lamp, and to Rand's surprise, he gave a little bow and gestured to a side door with it. "Your pallets are this way." Only a slight twist of his lips spoiled his act. Matt thrust his chin out at Jack and Strom. "You need those two to show us our beds?" "I'm a man of property," Hake said, smoothing the front of his soiled apron, "and men of property can't be too careful." A crash of thunder rattled the windows, and he glanced significantly at the ceiling, then gave them a toothy grin. "You want to see your beds or not?" Rand wondered what would happen if he said they wanted to leave. If you really did know more about using a sword than the few exercises Land showed you. "Lead the way," he said, trying to make his voice hard. "I don't like having anybody behind me." Strom snickered, but Hake nodded placidly and turned toward the side door, and the two big men swaggered after him. Taking a deep breath, Rand gave a wishful glance at the door to the kitchen. If Hake had already locked the back door, running now would only begin what he was hoping to avoid. He followed the innkeeper glumly. At the side door, he hesitated, and Matt crowded into his back. The reason for Hake's lamp was apparent. The door led into a hall as black as pitch. Only the lamp Hake carried, silhouetting Jack and Strom, gave him the courage to keep on. If they turned, he would know it. And do what? The floor creaked under his boots. The hall ended in a rough, unpainted door. He had not seen if there were any other doors along the way. Hake and his bullies went through, and he followed quickly, before they could have a chance to set a trap. But Hake merely lifted the lamp high and gestured at the room. "Here it is." An old storeroom, he had called it, and by the look of it, not used in some time. Weathered barrels and broken crates filled half the floor. Steady drips from more than one place on the ceiling, and a broken pane in the filthy window let the rain blow in freely. Unidentifiable odds and ends littered the shelves, and thick dust covered almost everything. The presence of the promised pallets was a surprise. "The sword makes him nervous. He won't try anything until we're sound asleep." Rand had no intention of sleeping under Hake's roof. As soon as the innkeeper left, he intended to be out the window. "It'll do," he said. He kept his eyes on Hake, wary for a signal to the two grinning men at the innkeeper's side. It was an effort not to wet his lips. "Leave the lamp." Hake grunted, but pushed the lamp onto a shelf. He hesitated, looking at them, and Rand was sure he was about to give the word for Jack and Strom to jump them. But his eyes went to Rand's sword with a calculating frown, and he jerked his head at the two big men. Surprise flashed from across their broad faces, but they followed him out of the room without a backward glance. Rand waited for the creak, creak, creak of their footsteps to fade away, then counted to 50 before sticking his head into the hall. The blackness was broken only by a rectangle of light that seemed as distant as the moon, the door to the common room. As he pulled his head in, something big moved in the darkness near the far door. Jack or Strom, standing guard. A quick examination of the door told him all he needed to know, little of it good. The boards were thick and stout, but there was no lock and no bar on the inside. It did open into the room, though. "I thought they were going for us," Matt said. "What are they waiting for?" He had the dagger out, gripped in a white-knuckled fist. Lamplight flickered on the blade. His bow and quiver lay forgotten on the floor. "For us to go to sleep." Rand started rummaging through the barrels and crates. "Help me find something to block the door." "Why?" You don't really intend to sleep here, do you? Let's get out the window and gone. I'd rather be wet than dead. One of them is at the end of the hall. We make any noise, and they'll be down on us before we can blink. I think Hake would rather face us awake than risk letting us get away." Muttering, Matt joined his search, but there was nothing useful in any of the litter on the floor. The barrels were empty, the crates splintered, and the whole lot of them piled in front of the door would not stop anyone from opening it. Then something familiar on a shelf caught Rand's eye. 2 splitting wedges covered with rust and dust. He took them down with a grin. Hastily he shoved them under the door and, when the next roll of thunder rattled the inn, drove them in with 2 quick kicks of his heel. The thunder faded, and he held his breath, listening. All he heard was the rain pounding on the roof. No floorboards creaking under running feet. "The window," he said. It had not been opened in years from the dirt crusted around it. They strained together, pushing up with all their might. Rand's knees wobbled before the sash budged. It groaned with each reluctant inch. When the opening was wide enough for them to slip through, he crouched, then stopped. "Blood and ashes," Matt growled. "No wonder Hake wasn't worried about us slipping out." Iron bars in an iron frame glistened wetly in the light from the lamp. Rand pushed at them. They were as solid as a boulder. "I saw something," Matt said. He pawed hurriedly through the litter on the shelves and came back with a rusty crowbar. He rammed the end of it under the iron frame on one side, and Rand winced. "Remember the noise, Matt." Matt grimaced and muttered under his breath, but he waited. Rand put his hands in the crowbar and tried to find good footing in the growing puddle of water under the window. Thunder rolled, and they heaved. With a tortured squeal of nails that made the hairs lift on Rand's neck, the frame shifted. 1/4 of an inch, if that. Timing themselves to peals of thunder and lightning cracks, they heaved on the crowbar again and again. Nothing. 1/4 of an inch. Nothing. A hair's breadth. Nothing. Nothing. Suddenly Rand's feet slipped in the water, and they crashed to the floor. The crowbar clattered against the bars like a gong. He lay in a puddle, holding his breath and listening. Silence but for the rain. Matt nursed bruised knuckles and glared at him. "We'll never get out at this rate." The iron frame was pushed out from the window not quite far enough to get 2 fingers under it. Dozens of thick nails crossed the narrow opening. "We just have to keep trying," Rand said, getting up. But as he set the crowbar under the edge of the frame, the door creaked as someone tried to open it. The splitting wedges held it shut. He exchanged a worried look with Matt. Matt pulled the dagger out again. The door gave another creak. Rand took a deep breath and tried to make his voice steady. "Go away, Hake. We're trying to sleep." "I fear you mistake me." The voice was so sleek and full of itself that it named its owner, Howell Goad. "Master Hake and his minions will not trouble us. They sleep soundly, and in the morning they will only be able to wonder where you vanished to. Let me in, my young friends. We must talk." "We don't have anything to talk to you about," Matt said. "Go away and let us sleep." Goad's chuckle was nasty. "Of course we have things to talk about. You know that as well as I. I saw it in your eyes. I know what you are, perhaps better than you do. I can feel it coming from you in waves. Already you halfway belong to my master. Stop running and accept it. Things will be so much easier for you. If the Tar Valon hags find you, you'll wish you could cut your own throat before they are done. But you won't be able to. Only my master can protect you from them." Rand swallowed hard. "We don't know what you're talking about. Leave us alone." The floorboards in the hall squeaked. Goad was not alone. How many men could he have brought in 2 carriages? "Stop being foolish, my young friends. You know very well. The great Lord of the Dark has marked you for his own. It is written that when he awakes, the new Dreadlords will be there to praise him. You must be 2 of them, else I would not have been sent to find you. Think of it. Life everlasting and power beyond dreams. His voice was thick with hunger for that power himself. Rand glanced back at the window just as lightning split the sky, and he almost groaned. The brief flash of light showed men outside, men ignoring the rain that drenched them as they stood watching the window. "I tire of this," Goad announced. "You will submit to my master, to your master, or you will be made to submit. That would not be pleasant for you. The great Lord of the Dark rules death, and he can give life in death or death in life as he chooses. Open this door! One way or another, your running is at an end. Open it, I say!" He must have said something else, too, for suddenly a heavy body thudded against the door. It shivered, and the wedges slid a fraction of an inch with a grate of rust rubbing off on wood. Again and again the door trembled as bodies hurled themselves at it. Sometimes the wedges held. Sometimes they slid another tiny bit. And bit by tiny bit the door crept inexorably inward. "Submit," Goad demanded from the hall, "or spend eternity wishing that you had." "If we don't have any choice," Matt licked his lips under Rand's stare. His eyes darted like the eyes of a badger in a trap. His face was pale, and he panted as he spoke. "We could say yes, and then get away later. Blood and ashes, Rand, there's no way out." The words seemed to drift to Rand through wool stuffed in his ears. No way out. Thunder muttered overhead and was drowned in a slash of lightning. Have to find a way out. Goad called to them, demanding, appealing. The door slid another inch toward being open. A way out. Light filled the room, flooding vision. The air roared and burned. Rand felt himself picked up and dashed against the wall. He slid down in a heap, ears ringing and every hair on his body trying to stand on end. Dazed, he staggered to his feet. His knees wobbled and he put a hand against the wall to steady himself. He looked around in amazement. The lamp, lying on its side on the edge of one of the few shelves still clinging to the walls, still burned and gave light. All the barrels and crates, some blackened and smoldering, lay toppled where they had been hurled. The window, bars and all, and most of the wall too, had vanished, leaving a splintered hole. The roof sagged and tendrils of smoke fought the rain around the jagged edges of the opening. The door hung off its hinges, jammed in the doorframe at an angle slanting into the hall. With a feeling of woozy unreality, he stood the lamp up. It seemed the most important thing in the world was making sure it did not break. A pile of crates suddenly heaved apart, and Matt stood up in the middle of it. He weaved on his feet, blinking and fumbling at himself as if wondering if everything was still attached. He peered toward Rand. "Rand? Is that you? You're alive. I thought we were both—" He broke off, biting his lip and shaking. It took Rand a moment to realize he was laughing and on the edge of hysteria. "What happened, Matt? Matt, what happened?" One last shiver racked Matt, and then he was still. "Lightning, Rand. I was looking right at the window when it hit the bars. Lightning. I can't see worth—" He broke off, squinting at the aslant door, and his voice went sharp. "Where's Goad?" Nothing moved in the dark corridor beyond the door. Of Goad and his companions there was neither sign nor sound, though anything could have lain in the blackness. Rand found himself hoping they were dead, but he would not have put his head into the hall to find out for sure if he had been offered a crown. Nothing moved out in the night beyond where the wall had been either, but others were up and about. Confused shouts came from above stairs in the inn, and the pounding of running feet. "Let's go all we can," Rand said. Hastily helping separate their belongings from the rubble, he grabbed Matt's arm and half-pulled, half-guided his friend through the gaping hole into the night. Matt clutched his arm, stumbling beside him with his head pushed forward in an effort to see. As the first rain hit Rand's face, lightning forked above the inn, and he came to a convulsive stop. Goad's men were still there, lying with their feet toward the opening. Pelted by the rain, their open eyes stared at the sky. "What is it?" Matt asked. "Blood and ashes. I can hardly see my own bloody hand." "Nothing," Rand said. "Luck. The light's own. Is it?" Shivering, he carefully guided Matt around the bodies. "Just the lightning,"